This is the introduction to a series of bite-sized catecheses, and we're going to be exploring the four last things. I'm going to begin with an introduction, and then there'll be four separate reflections, talks on the four last things, which are death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Quite a collection, no doubt. And they're one of the focuses of the season of Advent. And Advent is one of those wonderful times with so many things going on, but it's a bit like a rich Christmas pudding. There are many fruits and flavours, and it's very rich. Some of the flavours include the themes for each Sunday. The patriarchs, the prophets, John the Baptist, the Virgin Mary. There are also the themes given to us by the sets of gospel readings for each Sunday of Advent. And if you're really going for it, then you might focus on the four last things, but people often don't. Well, we are going for it. Christian teaching, and probably it stands to reason, is that we will experience at least three of the four last things. Death, we'll all experience. Judgment, we will experience. And then the third, one or the other perhaps, heaven or hell. There's so much more to say about those. But what's important to say by way of introduction is that the subject of the four last things takes us into an area known as eschatology. The word relates to the end times, in Greek the eschaton, from where we get the word eschatology, thinking about the end times, the last things, what the Nicene Creed calls the life of the world to come. I believe it's fair to say that the Church has been pulling its punches about the subject of eschatology in general and the four last things in particular, not just the subject of hell, but what heaven is and why it matters, what judgment is and what it isn't. And we don't often take a long, cool look at our mortality, the fact we will die. Now, someone put it to me recently that Christians have lost their way since people stopped believing in hell. That hell no longer featured in the Christian imagination was regarded as a good thing. And their point was that hell was a notion that was held over people as a threat. Hellfire and damnation preachers would ram it down people's throats. It emphasised punishment and not love. And no longer did people accept hell. And with that, the loss of the threat that Christians didn't know what to say anymore. There's something in that, I suspect, but I think there's rather more to say. It's not just about hell. Thinking about the four last things. It's curious that there is a stubborn and widespread belief in some sort of afterlife. Over half the population, by some measures, believes in that. But the Church has gone silent on it. There's an issue here, not just because teaching on hell has largely disappeared from the discourse of the Church. What has melted away, at least in the West, is any sense of the eschaton, of the last things and the life of the world to come. So let's talk end times. And this will take us to hope, to holiness, and humanity. If we can't speak about the life of the world to come, then we can't speak coherently about hope. Hope is really important when we talk about the end times and last things. And hope is very different from optimism. And how we see both of those depends on how we understand the nature of time. Because the end times are, in a sense, timeless. The late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks says, if we just think of time as one straight line, chronological time, this gives rise to optimism. Things will only get better. But if we see time in the context of a relationship with God, a covenant, as he puts it, this leads us to hope, for we are rooted in the presence of God. Jonathan Sacks continues, hope and optimism are often confused. They are, in fact, utterly different. Optimism is the belief that things will get better. Hope is the belief that together we can make things better. Optimism is a passive virtue, hope an active one. It takes no courage, only a certain naivety to be an optimist. It takes courage to sustain hope. Jonathan Sacks goes on to say that the reason why Jewish people retain hope but not optimism is knowing what we do of the past, of hatred, bloodshed, persecution in the name of God, suppression of human rights in the name of freedom, can be an optimist. But Jews have never given up hope. That's deeply inspiring, given what Jewish people have been through in recent decades. The Christian expectation is that we live in time, that time is fulfilled in the life of the world to come, and that gives rise to our hope. That hope, fixed on what is to come, gives rise to how we live our lives today. Without hope in the life of the world to come, in relationship with God, we can't live full lives in this world. If there is no hope, which is the conviction of life in its abundance beyond what we can see now, in this world or the next, then where do we turn? The danger is we turn in on ourselves and live as those without hope and joy and abundance. All that seeps away into a monochrome vision of life. And this relates to holiness. Holiness is being drawn into the life of God. Life beyond ourselves. Life beyond our limitations. Beyond our earthbound horizons. The ancient practice of the church is worship in an eastward orientation, which fixes its sight on the expectation that Christ will come again in glory. To look towards the east is to look towards the land of the rising sun, and that directs our eyes outwards to a new horizon, to the horizon of holiness, to the horizon of God. That's why churches are traditionally built on an east-west axis. Eyes fixed on the end times similarly look beyond to the mystery and the majesty of God. The wonderful book of the Revelation to John emphasizes time and again the call to holiness, both now and in the life of the world to come. And he connects the altar of the Eucharist with the worship of the altar of the Lamb in heaven. Hope and holiness in the life of the world to come is not cut off, autonomous life. It is deeply connected with God, deeply connected with the life of the saints, This is a social vision that spills back into our lives on earth, in the worship that we offer, in hope and expectation of the coming Christ. Ethical living today is all about our pursuit of holiness and hope in what is to come. Not because we fear the threat and pains of hell, but because we are drawn into the life of the all-holy God. Perhaps the person who commented that Christians have lost their way since hell was no longer widely held rather relished this focus back on the world. That's laudable. As the Christian Aid slogan some years ago put it, we believe in life before death. A nice twist. Christians believe in life before death and life after death. And that life is embodied. It's not just spiritual. The eschatological hope, the hope of the end times and what is to come, envisions human bodies transformed and glorified. Our humanity is fulfilled when we die. It's not just restricted to the earth. What we seek in body, mind and spirit is the reign of God, sometimes known as the kingdom of God. The focus on the kingdom of God is not just out there in what is to come, but is also here, where we live and move and have our being. Focus on the coming kingdom on earth redresses the balance of the pie in the sky ideas of what heaven might be about. But it misses the point that the eschaton is when Christ is all in all. That's the promise of the end times. And the Lord's Prayer connects the reign of God, the coming kingdom, in these two realms. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Eschatology connects our life here now with our life in the world to come. When we take our gaze off the end times and the life of the world to come, we lose our orientation Godwards and we become earthbound. Strip out the eschatological imagination from Christianity and you have secular humanism, without prayer, without worship, hope, contemplation, all pretty dull. Thank goodness we believe in the life of the world to come.